My name is Rachel Carter, and I am 29 years old. I never imagined that coming home one day earlier than planned would completely turn my life upside down. After 3 long days attending an intense medical workshop in Chicago, all I wanted was to return to my peaceful home and sleep in my own bed. But what I saw instead left me frozen. Cars were parked all over the street in front of my house. At first I thought maybe there had been an accident or a neighborhood gathering. But when I stepped inside, I saw nearly 100 people laughing, chatting, holding drinks, and a huge banner that said "Family is forever." These people were not total strangers, they were my relatives. Or at least that is what I was told. But I barely knew most of them. The phrase on that banner felt like a cruel joke. Before I go any further, where are you watching this from? If you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family, please like and subscribe. You are not alone. What happened next will show you why being related by blood does not always mean you belong. Let me take you back to explain why seeing my house filled with distant relatives hurt more than I can express. I have spent the last 7 years of my life in medical research. My focus has been on targeted cancer treatment, especially for aggressive lymphomas. I work at the Boston Medical Research Institute, and our team has been pushing the boundaries of what is possible. This workshop in Chicago was a major moment in my career. I was presenting our early findings to some of the top cancer doctors in the country. But my family never appreciated what I did. My mother, Diana, would often say things like, "Why waste your life on endless school and research when you could just get a real job?" She always saw my older brother Kevin's career in insurance as more practical and worthy of praise. I respect all professions, but growing up, it was clear Kevin was the favorite. When I got straight A's, my report card was briefly noticed, maybe taped to the fridge. When Kevin came home with B's and C's, they took him out for a fancy dinner because he worked so hard. It was always like that. In high school, Kevin's baseball games were like family holidays. Everyone showed up. My debate championships, only attended if nothing better was going on. The only one who quietly supported me was my dad, James. He passed away from heart failure 5 years ago. He would leave me little notes of encouragement or whisper that he was proud of me, but never in front of Mom or Kevin. After Dad passed, the house became too much for Mom to handle financially. Kevin had the idea that we should buy it together. He and his wife Stephanie would live on the ground floor. I would take the newly renovated second floor and we would turn the garage into a small in-law suite for Mom. On paper it sounded perfect, and maybe it was a chance to finally feel like I belonged. I used money from my research fellowship for my share of the down payment. Kevin used mostly money from Stephanie's parents. We became co-owners with written agreements about shared areas and responsibilities, something my lawyer Barbara strongly suggested, though it felt strange at the time. I mean, who needs legal paperwork between siblings, right? But it turned out to be wise advice. For about 4 years it worked well enough. I traveled often for conferences and research. Kevin and Stephanie became very social, often throwing dinner parties. I was invited, but they always seemed to pick dates when I had late lab work. Mom moved into her suite and made herself comfortable, maybe too comfortable. She would stop by my space unannounced, no matter how many times I asked her to message me first. "I am your mother, Rachel. I do not need an invitation to visit my daughter," she would say. And while I was gone, she would often rearrange my furniture to be more efficient. Still, I tried. I joined family dinners when I could. I smiled through holidays where Kevin told endless stories and everyone laughed while my career wins went unnoticed. Last Christmas, my name appeared in a major medical journal. No one mentioned it. But when Kevin won an award for sales, they threw him a party, and I kept trying. 3 months ago, I found out about the Chicago workshop and immediately messaged Kevin to let him know I would be away and asked him to keep an eye on my space. He replied, "No problem. Have a great trip. The house will be quiet that weekend." That message would haunt me when I stood in the doorway. That Friday evening, I felt like I was walking on air. The workshop had gone better than I ever imagined. My presentation received high praise and several senior researchers expressed interest in collaborating. One of them, Dr. Winters, who is widely respected in oncology, personally invited me to speak further about possible applications for our research. I skipped the celebratory dinner to catch an earlier flight home. I was eager to unwind, breathe in familiar air, and maybe share my success with my family for once. On the way to the airport, I even picked up small gifts, thoughtful ones. A Chicago-themed snow globe for Mom, which would go perfectly with the rest of her collection, a pack of craft beer from a well-known local brewery for Kevin, and some hand-wrapped chocolate truffles for Stephanie. I imagined us gathered around the table laughing, clinking glasses. For once they would be proud of me. I had no idea how wrong I was. When my Uber turned onto my street, it had to drop me off a block away. There were so many cars parked everywhere that traffic was backed up. At first I assumed one of the neighbors was throwing a party, but as I walked closer pulling my suitcase behind me, the realization began to set in. These were not random cars. I recognized the dusty blue Mustang that belonged to Uncle Rob. I spotted Patricia's minivan, the one with the pink dance school sticker, and even Cousin Michael's motorcycle. That sinking feeling grew with every step. Light blazed from my windows, music floated through the air, laughter, children shouted. The chaos seeped out before I even reached the porch. Through the front window I caught a glimpse of something that made me stop breathing for a second. A large banner stretched across the wall inside. It read, "Family is forever." My hand trembled as I pulled out my key and slowly opened the front door. I was hit by a wall of sound, dozens of voices, music, footsteps, children squealing. My entryway was buried under piles of shoes and jackets I didn't recognize. I stood there stunned, trying to understand what was happening. The first person to notice me was my cousin Tiffany, who I hadn't seen in at least 3 years. She paused mid-sentence, a glass of wine hovering near her mouth. "Rachel," she gasped. "Oh my God, you're here." Heads began turning, voices stopped mid-laugh. A wave of silence spread through the house as people realized I was standing there, suitcase still in hand, completely unprepared for whatever this was. Every part of my home was packed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives whose names I barely remembered filled every corner. I spotted faces I had not seen since my father's funeral. My mother's cousin Janet was serving food from my kitchen. Kids I had never met were playing games on my living room television. Someone had cleared off my coffee table where my research books usually sat, and replaced them with trays of snacks and family photo albums. Through the sea of people I saw my mother in the dining room laughing with a group of older relatives, but her laughter stopped the moment our eyes met. For a second her surprise showed, then she straightened her shoulders and smiled like nothing was wrong. Kevin walked in from the kitchen holding a tray of drinks. When he saw me, his face changed. He almost dropped the glass. Stephanie appeared next to him, leaning in to whisper something that made his ears turn red. My house, our shared house, looked nothing like the quiet, familiar place I had left. The walls were covered in family pictures, most of them without me. There were dozens of framed shots of Kevin, my parents, and group portraits I wasn't in. A slideshow played on a laptop nearby, filled with vacation images I had never seen. There was even a Carter Wilson family tree taped to the wall with certain names outlined in gold. Then my mother finally made her way to me, arms out like she was greeting a distant guest. Her hug felt stiff, like it was rehearsed. "Rachel, what are you doing back today? We thought you were returning tomorrow." Dozens of eyes were on me. I swallowed and kept my voice calm. The workshop finished early. I managed to get an earlier flight. Kevin appeared beside her with a weak smile. "Wow, great to see you, sis. Surprise, we're having a small family get-together." "A small gathering?" I asked, looking around the packed room. "There must be 100 people here." 99, Stephanie corrected proudly. "We've been organizing the Carter Wilson family reunion for months. Everyone's here, even Great-Aunt Edith flew in from Florida." Her words struck me like a slap. They had been planning this for months, in my house, and not one person thought to include me. At that moment, an older woman stepped up, eyes squinting. I recognized her as my father's aunt. "Is that James's daughter?" she asked, peering close. "My goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. I remember you, high school, right? You were always reading something," Aunt Edith said warmly as she hugged me. "Your brother has been such a great host. He gave us the full tour of the. He mentioned all the changes you made since your father passed. Said you're barely ever home with all your science work." My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile. "Glad you're enjoying the stay." As I drifted through the crowd, more small remarks chipped away at. Cousin Ryan casually said he had booked his flight 6 months ago. Uncle Paul thanked me for letting everyone use my space as if I had given permission. Aunt Carol mentioned how lovely my bedroom was, and how she had been staying in it the past 3 nights. My bed. Without saying a word, I walked away and climbed the stairs to my apartment. The door was unlocked. What I saw made my stomach twist. Air mattresses were scattered across the floor of my office. Suitcases were shoved into corners. My bed, my personal bed, was messy and smelled like someone else's perfume. My desk was cluttered. Framed research certificates had been taken down to make room for children's scribbles taped to the wall. I stood silently in the middle of the chaos that used to be my sanctuary, breathing deeply to hold back the rising wave of emotion. Below me, the noise of the party continued, music, chatter, footsteps, all echoing from a celebration I had never been told about. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "How was the flight? Did you get home okay?" I stared at the screen. My closest friend, completely unaware of what I had just walked into. Before I could respond, Kevin knocked once, and stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I sat on the edge of my bed, the unfamiliar scent clinging to the sheets around me, and waited. He looked nervous. "Look, Rachel, I know how this looks, but I can explain." I said nothing. He rubbed the back of his neck. The reunion, it started as a small idea. Just Mom, me and Stephanie chatting. We thought it'd be fun to get everyone together. Then Aunt Patricia wanted to invite the Florida side of the family, and well, it kind of grew. "And you thought it was okay to do this in my home?" "It's not just your home," he said, suddenly defensive. "We both own this place. You knew that when we signed the agreement. Besides, they're not strangers, they're our family." "My apartment is private," I said firmly. "That was always the agreement." He didn't reply. The door opened again and Mom walked in uninvited. Stephanie stood behind her. "Is everything all right up here?" Mom asked, although the way she crossed her arms made it clear she already knew the answer. "Our guests are wondering where the hosts disappeared to." "I was just asking Kevin why no one thought to tell me about the reunion," I replied, voice calm but firm. Mom waved her hand. "It was kind of last minute. We knew you had your workshop, and we didn't want to interrupt your schedule." "Last minute?" Cousin Ryan told me he booked his ticket 6 months ago." Mom's face tensed, then softened with a forced smile. "Well, we didn't think you'd want to deal with the planning. You're always so wrapped up in your science work." I turned to Kevin. "You told me specifically that the house would be quiet." "You lied." Kevin avoided my gaze. "Maybe I got the dates wrong." "For an event you've been planning for months?" I asked. Stephanie stepped forward. "Honestly, Rachel, we didn't think you'd be interested. You always skip family events. You're either typing away on your laptop or locked in your office taking calls. So instead of inviting me and letting me decide, you planned this around my absence. And you lied about it." No one answered. The silence confirmed everything. "You're taking this too personally," Mom said, shaking her head. "It's not like you ever tried to be involved in the extended family." Kevin chimed in. "When was the last time you called Aunt Carol, or even met Jennifer's baby?" I felt a wave of disbelief. I didn't even know she had a baby. No one tells me anything. A knock at the door interrupted the tension. Cousin Matthew peeked in. "Sorry to bother you, but people are asking about dinner." "We'll be right down," Stephanie replied, her voice suddenly Then she turned back to me, her smile gone. I walked to my dresser and opened a drawer. It had been tampered with. My clothes had been moved. "Who's been in my things?" I asked. "No one's going through anything," Mom said quickly. "We just needed a little space." As if on cue, a loud crash echoed from the bathroom. I rushed in and found a small boy, someone I had never seen before, standing beside shattered glass. "My grandmother's perfume bottles," I whispered. "I was just looking," he said nervous. Back in the room, I faced the three of them. "This is unacceptable." Mom rolled her eyes. "They're just things, Rachel. Family matters more." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Family? That's what you're calling this?" I opened my closet and found it filled with strangers' luggage. Kevin cleared his throat. "Actually, while we're talking, Stephanie and I were wondering, since you're gone so much, maybe you'd consider selling us your half of the house. We could really use the space. We're thinking about starting a family." There it was, the real reason for all that. Before I could respond, Stephanie's mother stepped into the doorway. "Diana, can you help us settle a debate about James's mother's maiden name?" Mom gave me a tight smile. "We'll talk about this later. Don't make a scene." This gathering means a lot to everyone. As they left, I noticed something sticking out from under a suitcase. A manila folder. I pulled it out. Inside were documents from Kevin's desk. Credit card bills, loan denials, and multiple attempts to refinance the mortgage. Debt, desperation. And so that was it, the reunion. The sudden interest in buying my half of the house. The lies. It all added up. I quietly slipped the folder back and looked out the window. More relatives were arriving with gifts and casseroles, unaware that the person whose name was still on the deed had been entirely cut out. I had two choices. I could scream, confront them all, make a scene and prove whatever story they had likely spun about me being difficult, or I could do something else. I chose the second path. I turned away from the noise and began to pack. I grabbed a small weekend bag and slowly filled it: clothes, toiletries, laptop, documents, essentials only. As I packed, I snapped photos of my room, the air mattresses, the broken perfume bottles, the altered furniture. Each photo was carefully date-stamped, because this was not over. As I carefully documented each photo, every detail of my overturned space, the clutter, the broken heirlooms. A soft knock tapped at the door. I opened it and found Aunt Grace standing there, my father's sister, one of the few family members who had always treated me with quiet kindness. At 78 she stood tall and composed, her eyes sharp and thoughtful. She offered me a soft, understanding smile. "I figured I'd find you up here," she said gently. "Mind if I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. She walked slowly into the room, eyes scanning the disarray. "I want you to know," she began as she lowered herself onto the edge of my bed. "I had no idea you weren't told about this reunion. When your mother and Kevin started talking about it, I specifically asked if you were involved. They assured me you had given your blessing, said you were too busy to participate." I continued folding my clothes into my bag. "This is the first I'm hearing about any of it." She sighed, a tired breath filled with quiet disapproval. "I thought so. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw your face downstairs." Her voice softened. "Your father would have been furious." Her mention of my dad triggered a rush of emotion I barely managed to contain. "They've been sleeping in my bed," I said, going through my things. "And Kevin, he just asked me to sell him my half of the house." Aunt Grace's eyes widened. "Did he now? How convenient." I glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice and subtly looked toward the hallway. "I overheard Kevin and Stephanie last night," she said. "They were speaking with someone in the kitchen, a financial advisor or maybe a loan officer. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but, well, old ears hear more than people think." "What did they say?" "They've overextended themselves," she said quietly. "Apparently they bought some investment properties that are not doing well. Credit card debt too." It sounded like they were looking for a way out. Her words echoed the exact story I had pieced together from the folder of financial documents. Everything was starting to "So this reunion, I can't say anything for sure," she said, choosing her words with care, "but hosting a grand event, making themselves look like the pillars of the family, just before asking you to give up your share of the house. That timing isn't random." I zipped my bag closed, a clear plan forming in my mind. I needed space, mental, emotional, and physical, and I needed to think clearly without the noise. "Aunt Grace, would you mind not telling anyone I've packed a bag?" She smiled, kind and steady. "Of course not." Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This was supposed to be your surprise tomorrow during the family gift exchange," she said, placing it in my hand. "But I think you should have it now." Inside was a delicate gold locket. I opened it carefully and found a tiny photo tucked inside: me and my father standing together on the day of my medical school graduation. His face glowed with pride. "I remember that day," Aunt Grace said. "He mailed me this picture the next morning, said it was the proudest moment of his life, watching you step across that stage." I blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. "Thank you," I whispered. She stood to leave but paused at the doorway. "Whatever you decide to do next," she said, "remember that your father always saw your worth. Don't let anyone make you question it, not even your family." When she left, I finished packing with quiet resolve. Outside my window, the party was louder now. Karaoke had started. A fresh wave of guests was arriving, arms full of casseroles and overnight bags. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Madison. Family emergency. I need a friend tonight, can I call you? Her reply was immediate, of course. What's going on? Rather than explain over text, I took one last look around the room. I placed the locket gently in the top of my bag and slung it over my shoulder. Downstairs I moved past groups of relatives chatting and laughing, barely noticing me. A few nodded, smiling politely. In the kitchen I found Stephanie managing a swarm of ants, preparing dinner using my cookware, the same pans I had asked her not to touch. "Rachel, there you are," she chirped. "We're just organizing dinner. Would you mind grabbing folding chairs from the basement? I've got some work emails I need to take care of," I said evenly. "I'll be stepping out for a bit." Her smile returned, this time with a hint of relief. "Oh sure, no worries. We've got it all under control here." As I reached the front door, I overheard a familiar voice. My cousin Thomas asking Kevin about property values. Kevin responded casually, "Oh, it's a fantastic investment. Once the paperwork goes through, we'll have the entire place. Finally start those renovations." I paused, my back turned to them, but I said nothing, because now, I had every word, every detail, every photo I needed. This wasn't over. "The second floor, just the way we've always dreamed of," Kevin had said with such casual confidence it was clear he believed my agreement to sell was already a done deal. He could not have been more wrong. Without saying another word, I slipped out the front door. The laughter and music from inside began to fade as I walked briskly to my car. No one noticed I had left. Once I was on the road, I called Madison. She listened silently, her shock growing with every sentence I shared. "Come stay with us tonight," she insisted gently. "Daniel's making his famous lasagna and the guest room's all yours." I thanked her but declined. I had already reserved a quiet hotel room downtown. I needed silence. I needed space. I needed to think without guilt, without manipulation, without my emotions being used against me. The hotel lobby was calm, cool, and quiet, everything my house was not. At the front desk, the receptionist greeted me with a smile. "Business or pleasure?" she asked. "Neither," I replied honestly. "Just putting some distance where it's needed." In my room, I laid out the photos I had taken, images of my invaded bedroom, the air mattresses in my office, the broken glass in my bathroom. I pulled up the pictures I had snapped of Kevin's financial documents. My mind clicked into strategy mode. I created folders, drafted email, cross-referenced the co-ownership agreement I had saved on my laptop. By midnight, my escape had shifted into a clear, deliberate plan. My phone vibrated non-stop with missed calls and texts. Most were from Kevin, increasingly aggressive in tone. Others came from Mom, shifting from worry to irritation. I ignored them all, except one. I messaged Aunt Grace to let her know I was safe. I thanked her again for the locket. Before I drifted into sleep, I opened my notes app and typed a single line. "Family means forever. But so do consequences." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. My phone lit up with 27 missed calls. More texts. From Kevin, "Where did you go last night? Mom's freaking out." From Mom, "Rachel, this is childish. Call me now." From Kevin again, "People are asking where you are. At least let us know you're okay." From Stephanie, "You're embarrassing Kevin in front of everyone." I placed my phone face down and ordered room service. Coffee, eggs, fresh fruit, something peaceful to remind me that I still had control over my own work. Then I made the call that would define my next steps. Barbara Reynolds, my attorney since the day I signed the purchase agreement. "Rachel," she answered warmly. "This is earlier than usual. Everything all right?" "Not quite," I replied. I told her everything, from the moment I walked through the door to the financial documents I had discovered. She listened carefully, asking questions only to clarify facts. When I finished, she paused and summarized. "So, your co-owner organized a large event without notifying you, gave dozens of people access to your private space, damaged your belongings, and is now pressuring you to sell, all while he's dealing with financial trouble." "That's correct," I said. "Can you come to my office at 11? She asked. "Bring the photos and any paperwork you have on the co-ownership terms. Let's go over your options." By 11 hours, I was seated in Barbara's conference room, laptop and files ready. A second woman was present, Barbara's colleague who specialized in property law.
Together for 2 focused hours, we reviewed every clause, every document, every text message. The agreement Kevin and I had signed, thanks to Barbara's foresight, included 2 clauses that now meant everything. Neither party could host more than 20 guests without written consent. Private floors must remain off limits unless the owner grants permission. He had broken. You have several options, Barbara explained. We can file for partition by sale, forcing the property to be sold and the proceeds divided, or we can demand a buyout at full market value, plus additional compensation for property damage and invasion of privacy. I looked up. And what about my mother? She's currently living in the in-law unit, Barbara's colleague noted. That arrangement is contingent upon both co-owners' consent. If you sell your share or force a partition, the new ownership structure would have to renegotiate that. By early afternoon, the fog in my head had lifted. I had a plan. Not revenge. Not anger. Just truth, clarity and legal precision. The next steps would not be emotional. They would be strategic. From this point forward, I decided everything would proceed legally and methodically. No more assumptions. No more verbal agreements. Barbara had been crystal clear. All communication with Kevin needed to be in writing. Texts, emails, records, anything that could be referenced later if things escalated. After leaving her office, I drove straight to my bank. I accessed my safe deposit box and removed several irreplaceable items. My father's letters, my grandmother's jewelry, and key legal documents I didn't want to risk leaving in the house. Then I met with my financial advisor. We reviewed all my investments, updated security protocols on my accounts, and ensured that none of my finances were tangled with Kevin's. Whatever happened next, I wanted clear separation and full protection. Late Sunday evening, when I finally returned to the house, it felt like entering the aftermath of a storm. The street was empty. The laughter and music from earlier had vanished. Only silence remained. But the front door told its own story. Sticky residue covered the lock, likely from tape used to keep it open for guests. Another violation. Another boundary crossed. Inside, the mess was still there. The furniture was out of place. Wine stains dotted the carpet. Empty bottles and forgotten personal belongings littered the shared spaces. I moved through each room with quiet precision, taking pictures, making notes. I documented everything. Upstairs in my apartment, the invasion was there were 2 sets of personal items on the nightstand. Different brands of toiletries, different perfume scents. Clearly, more than one person had used my bed. My office was covered in crayon marks and handprints. My books disturbed, my papers bent and smudged. In the bathroom, someone had tried to clean up the shattered perfume bottles. The tiny glass shards still sparkled between the floor tiles. I stepped carefully, resisting the urge to cry. Then my phone pinged. It was an email from Dr. Wynn. He had forwarded a message from the International Medical Research Consortium in Switzerland. Based on my presentation in Chicago, they wanted to offer me a 3-year appointment to lead a new project on targeted cancer treatment. They're eager to speak with you this week, the message read. My heart caught in my chest. The timing couldn't have been more surreal. An incredible career leap right in the middle of this personal chaos. As I stood by the window processing it all, I heard the front door open.
Rachel, Kevin called. Your car's out front. Where have you been? I didn't answer. Instead, I sent him a message. I am documenting the condition of my space. Please respect my privacy. I will communicate with you in writing from this point forward. A moment later, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Kevin knocked on my door. This is ridiculous, he said. You can't just disappear during a family reunion and then lock yourself away. People were worried. I said nothing. He knocked again, softer this time. Then again, then silence. Eventually I heard him retreat. A few minutes later, new messages popped up. This time from my mother. You're breaking my heart, Rachel. You're acting childish. You've ruined what was a beautiful family gathering. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded every message to Barbara. Then I called a locksmith. By the end of the evening, my apartment door had a new lock, and a small motion sensor system was installed, set to alert me to any unauthorized entry. That night, I took action. I scheduled a video interview with the Swiss research team for later in the week. I contacted cleaning services for quotes to professionally restore my apartment. I composed a detailed email to Kevin outlining the documented violations of our agreement, referencing specific clauses about guest limits, private property, and mutual consent, but the most satisfying step came last. I drafted a message addressed to every extended family member who had attended the reunion. It was polite, professional, and carefully worded. I expressed regret that I hadn't been informed of the gathering in advance, but hoped they enjoyed their time. I clarified that future visits to the property would require prior notice and coordination, and then without bitterness, I shared the news of my possible relocation to Switzerland. Not to boast, but to set the record straight, to remind them who I am, to remind myself who I am, because whatever story Kevin had been telling about me, whatever narrative of neglect or selfishness he had used to justify excluding me, it would no longer go unchallenged. By morning, the damage control had already begun, though not by me. My inbox held several responses from relatives, most apologizing. Many claimed they had no idea I had not been part of the planning. Aunt Patricia even called me directly, her voice full of guilt. "I'm so sorry," she said. "If I had known you weren't involved, I never would have stayed in your room. Kevin and your mother told everyone you were fine with it, that you had given your blessing and just didn't want to be part of the logistics." It was infuriating, but it also confirmed what I had already suspected. This wasn't an oversight. It had been a deliberate lie. I thanked Aunt Patricia for her honesty and added her message to my growing file. Later that day, I finally stepped out of my apartment. Kevin was in the kitchen, pacing with his phone in hand, his expression twisted between anger and unease. "We need to talk about this email you sent me," he said, holding up his screen. "Legal action? Violations? This is family, Rachel, not a business deal." I kept my voice even. "From this point on, I prefer to communicate in writing. I've made my position clear." His voice sharpened. "Is this about the house? If you needed money, you could have just said so. You didn't have to start throwing around threats." The irony made me want to laugh. "This is about respect, Kevin," I said calmly. "The kind you clearly lack. You held a party with nearly 100 people in our house without telling me. You let strangers into my bedroom. You moved my things. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a violation." He scoffed, frustrated. "You're never even here. You're always buried in your work. What difference does it make if we use the space while you're gone?" "The difference," I replied, "is that I co-own this home. I paid for half of it. My name is on the deed, and what you did crossed every line we agreed to when we signed that document." He leaned against the counter, face red. "So you're going to punish everyone? Mom's a wreck. Stephanie's been crying nonstop. Is this what you want?" I picked up my key. I had a video interview scheduled with the Switzerland team. "What I want," I said evenly, "is privacy, respect, and legal boundaries. Everything else is in the email. I suggest you read it carefully and consider hiring your own attorney." As I stepped out the door, I heard Kevin's voice behind me, tight and frantic as he made a call likely to our mother. The problem they created was now a very real one, and my solution was already unfolding. The video interview with the International Medical Research Consortium was everything I had hoped for. Dr. Winters had apparently given me a glowing reference. The Swiss team was warm, brilliant, and genuinely excited about the research I had presented in Chicago. The opportunity included a housing stipend, relocation support, and full access to advanced labs. It was the kind of offer you dream of and work years to earn. "We'll need your decision within 2 weeks," Dr. Mueller, the program director, said. "Our grant cycle begins shortly." "I'm strongly interested," I told him. "I just have some personal matters to resolve first, but I don't foresee any issues accepting." After the call, I sat in the quiet of the parking garage for a long moment, letting it all sink in. 3 years in Switzerland. Research. Respect. It was everything I had worked for, and now I had a timeline and leverage. Instead of returning home, I stopped at a nearby cafe, ordered a coffee, and pulled out my notebook. I had a plan. Now I needed to execute it. My first stop, a property management agency. I scheduled a meeting with a firm that specialized in high-end co-owned rentals. The director, Miss Collins, greeted me with a calm, experienced professionalism. I briefly explained my situation. "I co-own a property with a family member. I'm relocating internationally for several years. I want to retain ownership, but I'd like my portion to be professionally managed, and kept separate from any direct involvement with the other owner. She nodded thoughtfully. We've handled situations like this before, she said. The key is establishing clear legal boundaries and keeping communication structured. She outlined their services: tenant screening, rent collection, maintenance coordination, monthly reporting. Most importantly, they would act as a buffer, ensuring I'd never have to speak to Kevin again about the property. That alone made the service worth every penny. We'll need to conduct a full inspection and create a detailed report on the condition of your space, Ms. Collins explained as we reviewed the next steps. Because this is a co-owned property, we'll also need to outline shared responsibilities and establish protocols for access to common areas. We scheduled the inspection for the following afternoon. During hours I knew Kevin would be at work. My next stop was Barbara's office to finalize the legal updates to our co-ownership agreement. She had drafted a clear, enforceable amendment. In lieu of selling my share of the house, I would retain ownership and formally designate my space for rental under professional management. This blocks any attempt Kevin might make to pressure you into selling, Barbara explained. It also transforms your half of the property into a source of income and adds a neutral third party to manage any ongoing issue. She had also prepared a notice regarding the damages from the reunion. The repair costs would be deducted from our shared maintenance fund before any profit from rentals was split. A separate document addressed my mother's living arrangement, ensuring her continued residence while also reinforcing boundaries and clarifying that any future decisions would require the consent of both owners. Send these documents by certified mail, Barbara advised. You'll create a formal paper trail, and it makes it clear you're taking this seriously. Over the next several days, I moved steadily toward my future. I reviewed Swiss visa requirements. I initiated a leave of absence request with my current research institute. I created folders: take, store and sell, slowly working through every room of my apartment. Everything I did was intentional. Meanwhile, my phone remained flooded with messages from Kevin and my mother. Kevin bounced between anger and apology. You're overreacting. We're family. Come on, Rachel, let's talk this out. Fine. Ignore me. Let your lawyer talk to mine. Please. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof. My mother's messages were more emotional and more manipulative. I raised you better than this. Your father would be heartbroken. I'm not feeling well. The doctor says it's stress. Is that what you want? I stayed firm. I responded only to substantive issues and only in writing. Emotional manipulation had no space in this process. When my mother mentioned a health crisis, I sent a short, neutral email. I'm sorry to hear you're feeling unwell. I've attached information regarding your insurance coverage and local urgent care clinics. Please keep me updated. The property inspection with Miss Collins went exactly as planned. She moved through the rooms, clipboard in hand, taking photos of scuffed floors, chipped paint, and the subtle water damage on the ceiling above my bathroom, likely from too many uninvited guests using the facility. Her professionalism was unwavering. Until Kevin came home early, he froze in the doorway, watching her photograph the damage. Who's this? He asked sharply. I'm Jennifer Collins from Elite Property Management, she said without hesitation. Carter has engaged our firm to oversee rental preparations for her portion of the property. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, to rising panic. Rental? What rental? His voice cracked. Rachel, you can't rent out your part of the house. Actually, Miss Collins replied calmly, she can. The co-ownership agreement permits either party to lease their portion, provided they use a licensed management service. We'll be handling everything: screening tenants, managing payments, ensuring proper upkeep. There will be no disruption to shared areas. Kevin followed us for the rest of the inspection, firing off panicked questions. Who's going to live here? What if they damage something? You're just doing this to punish me. I answered only when necessary, always with facts, always without emotion. He eventually gave up and retreated to another room, presumably to call our mother. Sure enough, 30 minutes later she showed up. I was in my office packing books into a labeled box when the door opened. Despite the new lock, she had clearly used Kevin's emergency key. That too would need to be changed. This has gone far enough, she announced, stepping into the room like it still belonged to her. You're tearing this family apart over nothing. I didn't look up. I'm exercising my legal rights regarding a property I co-own, I said quietly. There's nothing else to discuss. She crossed her arms. Is this really the kind of daughter your father raised? Cold, distant, litigious. I paused, then met her eyes.
No, he raised a daughter who worked hard, honored her agreements, and never allowed others to walk over her. Her face shifted, surprise perhaps, or shame, but I didn't wait to find out. I returned to my packing. Each item another small piece of control reclaimed, because this time I wasn't being pushed out. I was moving forward on my terms. Nothing personal. My mother sputtered, "But you're bringing strangers into our home. You're sending legal notices to your own brother. You're threatening the roof over my head." I gently set the book down and looked at her fully for the first time. The legal notices were never the problem. They became necessary because my privacy and property weren't respected. I took a breath. "And for the record, your housing isn't being threatened. The updated documents clearly protect your living space. All I asked for were boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated, almost offended. "We're family. We shouldn't need paperwork between us." I held her gaze. The reunion proved exactly why we do. She had no reply. "I have a call with Switzerland in 20 minutes, I added. Her face shifted. "Switzerland, what are you talking about?" For the first time since the chaos began, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. "I've been offered a research position with the International Medical Research Consortium. 3 years in Geneva, possibly more." The words hit her like a slap. "You're moving to Switzerland, just like that? What about your job here? What about this house? What about your family?" "My current institution supports the opportunity. The house will be professionally managed. And family." I paused, choosing the words carefully. "Family will always be family. But sometimes, distance is what gives you perspective." She left the room in tears, and for a moment, guilt threatened to bubble up until, an hour later, I received another text from Kevin. "You've made Mom sick with worry, hope you're satisfied." The certified letters were delivered that evening, and by the next morning, Barbara had received an email from an attorney representing Kevin, requesting a formal meeting to discuss alternative resolutions. Progress. 3 days later, the Swiss offer became official. I asked for a 1-week window to finalize my decision, and it was granted. During that week, Kevin, his lawyer, Barbara, and I met in her office, a neutral environment where no one could raise their voice or deflect with emotion. Kevin's attorney proposed that he purchase my interest in the home at 15% below market value. The reason? The inconvenience of the rental arrangement and the potential devaluation of the shared property. Barbara didn't. She countered, "Either Kevin buys my share at full market value plus compensation for property damage, or we proceed with the property management arrangement as originally outlined." 2 hours of tense negotiation later, we hit a wall. Kevin couldn't afford to buy me out, not at a fair price. His only remaining option was to accept the rental setup with the conditions we set: no interference with tenant selection, maintenance handled by the management firm, and clearly divided common area usage. He stood up from the table, frustrated. "You're really doing this?" he asked. "Moving to Switzerland and renting your space to strangers, just to prove a point?" "This isn't about proving a point," I replied, calm as ever. "It's about pursuing my career, and protecting my investment." The reunion only clarified how necessary legal protections have become. That evening, I signed my acceptance of the Switzerland position, and began the visa process. I spent the next few days packing. My phone kept buzzing. Missed calls, unread messages. I didn't check most of them. I responded only when something truly required my attention. The day before I left, Aunt Grace came by with a small gift, a leather-bound travel journal. Inside she'd written, "Your father always said you'd see the world. Make him proud." We drank tea in my half-empty living room. "Will you stay in touch?" she asked gently. "Of course," I smiled. "You're always welcome to visit me in Switzerland. I might take you up on that," she chuckled. "Always wanted to see the Alps." As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Your mother and Kevin may come around eventually. Some people need consequences before they understand what they've done." I nodded, but didn't reply. I had stopped planning my life around maybes. That night, I stayed with Madison and her husband. My apartment had been handed over to the management. My phone showed 47 missed calls, mostly from Kevin and Mom. Some from relatives, now dragged into the drama. Madison raised her glass to new beginnings in Switzerland, and to knowing when a bridge isn't worth rebuilding. Her husband added, "We clinked glass," and I felt it, not just sadness, but liberation. The freedom to define family on my own terms. That night, as I lay in a peaceful guest bed, a final message came through from Kevin. "This isn't over. When you come to your senses and come home, things will be different. I didn't but I saved the message as a reminder, not of what I left behind, but of why I left. 2 weeks later, I was standing in my Geneva apartment, sunlight pouring through tall windows, fresh croissants on the counter, and my phone buzzing with an almost comical notification. When 100 Kevin's name dominated the list, followed by my mother's. Some were from extended family. I listened to a few voicemails. They began angry, grew desperate, and ended with barely coherent rants. The last one at 3:47 a.m. Boston time was from Kevin. Rach, the property manager's showing your rooms today. They're saying I have no right to stop them. This is my house too. Call me back right now or I swear I'll. The message cut off. Voicemail limit. I forwarded it to Barbara with a single note, continuing communication despite multiple requests to stop. Please advise. Her reply came an hour later. Standard escalation. Management company is proceeding as planned. You focus on your research, we've got this. And focus I did. The International Medical Research Consortium was more than I'd imagined. Cutting-edge labs, collaborative teams, global experts. Dr. Mueller had brought together minds from around the world. My work was no longer sidelined, it was central, validated, respect. You've done remarkable work with receptor mapping, said Dr. Amani, a biochemist from Kenya. Your second paper in experimental oncology made quite an impact. Dr. Chun, the team's imaging specialist, added, that Chicago presentation, that was just the surface. I'd love to hear more about your full model when you have time. After years of begging for recognition in my own home, the validation was almost surreal. But it wasn't luck, it was the result of choosing myself, of walking away from what was safe of standing firm, even when guilt tried to follow. Back in Boston, the updates continued. Week 1. A tenant was placed, a visiting professor from UCLA. 1-year lease signed. Kevin tried to block access, but backed down when legal action was mentioned. Week 2. Rent deposited. My account showed the balance, minus the repairs and management fee. My mother filed a formal complaint about strangers using the laundry. A schedule was posted. Week 3. Kevin hired a new attorney and tried to invalidate the management agreement. Barbara's note, no merit, but prepare for more stalling. Through it all, the messages kept coming. Kevin's tone shifted from anger to guilt. This tenant is weird, keeps odd hours, mom's uncomfortable. Dad would have never let the family fall apart like this. How long are you going to punish? My mother cycled through emotions. I'm humiliated. Everyone's asking. And for once I didn't feel the need to reply. Because the story they were telling wasn't mine anymore. My doctor put me on anxiety medication. Because of this situation, I don't understand why you couldn't just talk to us instead of running away. Maybe we should have told you about the reunion. That last message from my mother was the first fragile acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It arrived nearly 6 weeks after I left Boston. I responded simply, yes, you should have. It opened a door, not reconciliation, but reality. Not warmth, but truth. A few hours later, she replied, we didn't think you'd care. You always kept yourself distant from family gatherings. I typed back without emotion. I was never invited to most of them, and my home was used without my consent. She pushed again. It's Kevin's home too. My private apartment isn't. We had an agreement. Several days passed before her next message. I'm trying to understand your perspective. It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the denial that had held our family narrative together for years. Back in Switzerland, my life unfolded in a rhythm that felt finally mine. My research team became more than colleagues, they became a chosen family. We celebrated breakthroughs, supported each other through setbacks, and built something more genuine than most of my blood relationships had ever felt. Madison visited during my 3rd month. As we walked along the edges of Lake Geneva, she smiled and said, you seem lighter, like you've let go of something heavy. Expectations, I said. Maybe the idea that I had to fight to belong somewhere I never truly did. Family should be the ones who see you, not the ones who try to erase you. Back in Boston, the practical systems held strong. The tenant was respectful, rent came in on time, and Kevin eventually stopped trying to interfere once he realized the legal structure was sound. 6 months in, I received a message I hadn't expected from Kevin. I'm in Dad's old study. The tenant's away at a conference, so the management company let me in to fix a leak. Being here without you feels strange. I keep thinking I'll hear you typing upstairs. I'm not going to apologize through email for something that deserves a real conversation. But I will say this, Mom keeps saying you abandoned us. But I'm starting to wonder if maybe we abandoned you first. Stephanie's pregnant. Just found out. It's made me think about what kind of father I want to be. I read his message 3 times before responding the next day. Congratulations on the baby. That's significant. The trials are still early, but the response rate is promising. Tumor reduction in 78% of patients with fewer side effects than traditional treatments. I'm not ready to pretend things are fine between us. But I appreciate your message. The house was always more your dream than mine. My work is my home now. And for the first time, I'm surrounded by people who value what I do. Tell Mom I'm glad she kept the article. From that point forward, communication resumed. Not warm but real. Kevin sent ultrasound photos. I sent links to my publication. My mother, over time, began adding brief notes of her own. When I reached my 1-year anniversary in Switzerland, Barbara emailed with a formal offer. Kevin had secured financing and wanted to purchase my share of the house at full market value. This would give you a clean exit, she wrote. The rental setup is working well, but this removes you from the entanglement altogether. I discussed it with close friends, something I never would have done before. What does selling mean to you? Lucia asked. Financial freedom, but also an emotional step away. I replied. Is it closure? Asked Dr. Amani. Maybe. Or maybe it's like confirming I never really belonged. Mark, our Swiss colleague, offered a gentler perspective. Or maybe it's recognizing that your story simply continues elsewhere, and that's valid. I thought about it, and then I accepted on 2 conditions. A portion of the proceeds would fund a medical research scholarship in my father's name. My mother's living rights would be legally secured for the rest of her life. The papers were signed, the funds transferred, the tie to the physical home severed. But something more valuable remained. A fragile thread of family, rebuilt on truth, not fantasy. A 1.5 years after walking away, I returned to Boston for a medical conference. I met Kevin, Stephanie and their 2-month-old daughter Emily for dinner. My mother joined us too. Older, quieter and perhaps finally understanding something I had spent my life trying to say. The meal was awkward at times, safe topics, nervous pauses. But when Kevin placed Emily in my arms and her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, something shifted. She has Dad's eyes, I whispered. My mother nodded, tears in her eyes. James would have adored her. And he'd be proud of your research, Kevin added. If the expanded trials hold, it could save lives. I said. Thousands of them. As we left the restaurant, my mother hesitated. Will you visit again before you go back to Switzerland? I have meetings the next 3 days, I said. But maybe breakfast before my flight on Sunday. Relief softened her features. I'd like that. We didn't, but we shared something more honest, a glance of mutual respect, no longer trying to pretend. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat quietly. I remembered the night I walked into my house to find 99 people under a banner that said family means forever, and I realized, the pain hadn't disappeared, but it had evolved, into clarity, into boundaries, into peace. My phone buzzed. Lucia, how was dinner, survival or revival? I smiled as I typed back. A little of both. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, but maybe we're building something new based on who we are now, not who we pretended to be. The next morning, I woke to an email, approval granted. Our team's expanded clinical trials would proceed. Real patients, real hope. None of it would have happened if I hadn't had the courage to walk away from what hurt, even when it was wrapped in the word family. That banner was right. Family does mean forever. But not in the way my mother and brother once believed. Family, the one we're born into, and the one we choose, shapes us. But only we decide whether those ties become chains, or the threads that strengthen us, as we walk our own path. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Have you learned, maybe the hard way, that sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones we need boundaries with the most? If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what breaks us, even when it calls itself love. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve to be seen, valued and respected, no matter what any banner says.